Okay, hi everybody. Happy Friday. It is a public holiday today in most parts of the world, or bank holiday. I hope that you are taking some time to find the balance between being productive and engaged with work and also, of course, with your studies, but also finding some time for downtime and rejuvenating practices. So, last night, of course, in South Africa, we had the unsurprising but perhaps challenging news that the lockdown would be extended for a further 2 weeks. So this might feel like a setback, of course. It might feel like we're starting the whole 21 days all over again. But it's important, I think, to apply the techniques that we've been speaking about during this video series, which is we can focus on the setback, of course, or we can use a solution-focused mindset to recognize that, well, we've already done 2 weeks and we survived it. And not only that, we good things have come out of it. Whilst it might not always have been easy, we can find the positives and we can find the growth and the gains that we've had. And finding this perspective and shifting this perspective allows us to give our sacrifice some meaning. So my suggestion at this point would be use this period right now as perhaps a lockdown audit for your own personal self. So you might have had high hopes and goals and aspirations about what you wanted to achieve during this initial 21 days, and you might have found that some of this has fallen by the wayside as the daily life, the rhythms of daily life have taken over. This, of course, can happen. So by now you have a good idea of what's working and what's not working, and it gives you an opportunity to do a reset, to redesign your goals, and to pick up a little bit on the things that you wanted at the beginning that you might not have implemented as well as you might have. So this is the next video in the Regent Business School's lockdown video series. It's part 2 of our positive psychological techniques session. I mentioned that we might go into a third video on this on these techniques, and I think we will, because there was not enough time in this video to get into the ins and outs of mindfulness, and that in itself is a very rich topic and worth spending the time on. We spoke a bit about self-compassion in the first part. If you missed that, feel free to go back and check it out. It'll be in the playlist above. So positive psychology, as we spoke about it, is the domain of psychology that's interested in the science of happiness as opposed to unhappiness and disorder. So it's about thinking about the domains of life where you might think about a specific life domain where one is flooded with unhappiness and pathology and symptomology, and there's almost no positive emotion. And we can think about that on a continuum to a life where there is some unhappiness, but it's contained. There's fleeting happiness; it's not maintained, it's not resilient. Typically, this is where psychology traditionally has been focused, is alleviating this suffering, understanding this, and alleviating these conditions. So at this point, positive psychology comes into the picture, saying, well, let's talk about what it means to live a pleasant life, a meaningful life, an enriched life where we experience meaning and purpose, where we can find what we'd call a state of flow in our daily activities. Flow is when we get so engaged with doing something that we don't even notice the time passing. That's what we call the flow state, and that's a big part of positive psychology as well. So what the idea is to find a life that has a deep sense of meaning and purpose, and for happiness to be resilient, not transient, and for happiness to be not situational, but rather something that we feel we can have control over. So self-compassion, of course, is part of the recipe, but there's a lot more than just self-compassion. We can talk a little bit about gratitude. Gratitude is a concept that's very well established in the literature on positive psychology. We tend to be more focused on our negative experiences than our positive ones. We can exaggerate the hardships in our life without acknowledging what we do have. And there are very sound evolutionary reasons for why this might be the case and why we'd be biased in this regard. Because evolutionary forces are selecting for our survival, not for happiness. So another way of saying that is happiness is not actually a natural or normal human state. Often we get it as a byproduct of other behaviors, and we find ourselves there accidentally. but we don't necessarily go about achieving it in a conscious, structured way. Um, so that's of course the challenge there is to implement the building blocks in our life to get to that point. And gratitude is one of these processes. It's about taking stock of what we do have as opposed to what we've lost or what we're missing. A very good practical method for this is the gratitude journal. This is used very widely in therapeutic interventions. We document the things in our lives that we're grateful for. It's that simple. People choose to do 3 a day or 5 a day. This helps to shift perspective and increase the satisfaction with ourselves and with our lives. So the important point here is not to suppress the feelings that we have, our difficult emotions, but rather to put them into perspective as we process them. It's something to look out for, because gratitude can be weaponized against our ability to work through these feelings. Some people feel that they don't have a right to be unhappy in certain situations, or they feel, I have so many things in life, I shouldn't feel the way I am feeling, and then that robs them of the ability. It's unhelpful. It robs them of the ability to process the feelings they need to feel. So gratitude it's more targeted at acknowledging the challenges that we face and acknowledging our pain. And as we mentioned in the previous session, accepting that pain is part of living, but also remembering the aspects of our life that we can be happy and grateful for. Another way of contributing positive psychological techniques, or I should say adding to positive psychological techniques in our lives, is acts of kindness towards others. This is also something the research has demonstrated that is really helpful in creating happiness for ourselves. Again, it's important to be careful about this and to think about it in a sophisticated way, because there's always the risk, and this is very, very common, that we tend to neglect our own needs whilst focusing on the emotional responsibilities of other people. We try to fulfill their needs at the expense of ours. Our tank is empty before we give to other people. This is a common challenge that people face, and it often lends to them feeling burnt out and depressed. So we need to take care of ourselves, of course, and take responsibility for our own emotional well-being and our mental health. But once we've done this, giving to others is a very important way of reinforcing connection and experiencing a sense of meaning and happiness. As we discussed in our conversation on self-compassion, acts of kindness towards ourselves are important, but also acts of kindness towards others is really essential in this way. So meaning, of course, this is something we keep on coming back to, is meaning and having purpose. And this is so important in boosting our well-being. So meaning is essentially a narrative. It's a story that we tell ourselves that speaks to a bigger picture in our life. And it helps to explain why we suffer and why we are happy and why we are joyful and why we experience disappointments and the whole full range of human experience. And this enriches our daily activities, having this narrative that we have that is there to provide that structure. So it's important, I think, to weave this narrative into our lives, because this allows us to find meaning in everything we do, even the parts of our lives that are more menial and less stimulating or exciting. So another really interesting technique in designing a life that is full is breaking it up into days. So if you say, well, I want to live a beautiful life, well, what does that look like? What does it mean, first of all, to live a beautiful day? This is a tip from Therapist Aid that is really insightful, I think. You design your beautiful day. What does it mean to have a day that is filled with beauty? And this is an even more relevant task right now, I think, in situations where there are lockdowns and restrictions, of course, and restraints. And it might feel like this is a harder task, but in fact, it's always been the case that there are restraints and restrictions on us. For example, if you feel that living a beautiful day would be hiking in the Swiss Alps, there, of course, are going to be time constraints and financial constraints and all sorts of other constraints on that. So we have to work within reality. And that's the case now. You might find that you can't do everything that you might have wanted to do, but that doesn't stop you from putting the basics in place. And you write it down, you structure it, you plan it. And there's a long weekend this weekend. That seems like a really good time to start thinking about these types of things as well as you top up your tank again. And it doesn't have to be a solitary day. It could involve lunch with your family or your lockdown companions. It could involve video consultations, chats with other friends and family that you aren't with. It's about knowing your needs and checking it and saying, well, what is the type of life that I want to live, and then what is the recipe for that. So that pretty much takes us to the end of this session, the lockdown video series, psychological techniques, positive psychological techniques. We will be following up next week, Wednesday, on part 3, where we'll talk a bit more about mindfulness and what it means to live a mindful life, and what are the benefits of this. My name is James Sturdy. I'm with the Region Business School Counseling Services. As always, please feel free to reach out to counseling@regent.ac.za to set up an appointment for a personal, confidential counseling session if this is something that you're interested in. Have a very good long weekend, and we'll chat next week.